Hello everybody, I'm Chris and welcome to the Green Malt episode number 8, or I guess Whiskey episode number 8 I should say, now that I gave an attempt to a beer episode. I wasn't planning on doing this afternoon, and the lighting in here is a bit wonkier than it normally is, just saying a lot, but oh well, I'm a whiskey enthusiast, not a photog or a lighting enthusiast, so bear with my ghostly white half face. Anyway, I have before me two whiskeys, not one, two Glenfiddichs, and I was kind of inspired to give this a little bit of a different go than I normally would, because I tried this Glenfiddich. And I should say before I start talking about the two whiskeys, I'm kind of coming at this from a bit of a weird reverse angle, I suppose you could say, because I think Glenfiddich, along with Glenlivet, is probably one of the first whiskeys that most people try when they get into scotch or single malts or whiskey or whatever it might be, just because it's everywhere, it's easily accessible, it's relatively cheap, and it's not bad. I mean, it's pretty good quality for what you're paying for it. I didn't do that. I kind of skipped over it and jumped into some of the I don't want to say more interesting stuff, but I just sort of breezed past it and disregarded it and didn't really think much of it. And then I bought this bottle about 6 months ago, didn't bother to open it up. I mostly bought it because I was cruising through the liquor store and noticed a Glenfiddich that was bottled at 51% instead of 40%, and that enough was sufficient to catch my eye, so kind of on a whim I picked it up and didn't try it for a while. And when I did, I was impressed, to say the least. So I really wanted to talk about it. And it occurred to me that maybe one of the best ways to do that is to lead off with the 12-year-old. And then talk about how the two compare, given that the 12-year-old is going to be one that's going to be familiar to so many people. It might be instructive to help illustrate how different the 15-year-old distillery edition Glenfiddich is from the 12. And that doesn't necessarily mean different is better, worse. It's just a really cool kind of comparison study from one distillery, two different bottles in one distillery. You might say that the 15-year-old standard bottling of Glenfiddich would be a fairer comparison, but I don't know if that's much more helpful, because honestly the 15-year-old is prepared much more different, or much differently I should say. The standard Solera 15-year-old is prepared much differently than the distillery edition 15-year-old, for reasons that I don't really think I should get into. But yeah, so Glenfiddich. Everybody has probably heard of it. If you've ever gone into a liquor store, you've probably heard of Glenfiddich. It was until very recently the best-selling single malt scotch in the world by volume, although I think recently Glenlivet may have overtaken it. But it's probably the distillery that is most responsible for making single malt a thing, a desirable thing, a sought-after thing, at least on any kind of mass market scale. And it's still a family-owned distillery, which is kind of cool. I mean, they're huge and they produce a ton of whiskey, but they've not sold to a conglomerate corporation. That's something a little bit different. Now, the other interesting thing about Glenfiddich, rather, not Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, is that almost all, if not all, of their production goes into their own single malts. They don't contribute to blends. They don't sell barrels to independent bottlers. So you'll never, or I don't think you'll ever see, I've never seen, never heard of existing a bottle of Glenfiddich that isn't produced by the official Glenfiddich distillery, which again is kind of cool. So what makes the 12-year-old as popular as it is? Well, they do a good job of producing it, and it's relatively low ABV. It's bottled at 40%. They go through all the usual chill filtering and slight caramel added color to it. Well, you can't really see it here, for what that's worth. But it's very approachable. It's a very light spirit. The spirit itself, the Glenfiddich distillery has apparently the smallest stills in the industry. They have a lot of them because they produce a ton of whiskey, but Their stills are very small, which is supposed to create a more complex and flavorful spirit before the aging begins. Maybe. I don't know. It could be true. But for all of that, it's a very light whiskey. Very, very light in body, in sensation when you drink it. So it's a very approachable whiskey. It's very reasonably priced and it's everywhere, so it's often somebody's first step into the whiskey world. So let's talk a little bit about the 12. It's a very fruity nose. And I should say, this has been sitting in the glass for about 10 minutes, no water added. I don't think I'll add any water to this one. Very light and floral and fruity. As expected, there's no sense of alcohol coming off the beverage. You don't get any little ethanol burn when nosing it. And I'm getting in there a little bit, so I should sense a little bit. I mean, that probably speaks not just to the 40% alcohol by volume or anything like that, but it speaks to I think the quality of the underlying spirit itself, that it's well constructed and well made. I think. I mean, I don't know. No, I should say on the nose, I said it was very fruity. And I only described it that way because I don't know if I could tell you what fruits they are. Again, it's a very light nose. And I can't emphasize enough how inexpert I am at smelling things. So if it's not punching me in the face, it's going to be hard for me to identify. Especially something like Glenfiddich 12. As I said, I kind of skipped past the Glenfiddich stage of my whiskey education. I kind of disregarded it, kind of turned my nose up a little bit at it, I have to say. So I don't have the long history of drinking this that I can readily pull out of memory and experience tasting or nosing notes. I honestly, I bought the demi bottle just for the purposes of tasting it and talking about it here, because I have what limited experience I have. I know the difference between the two so great. So yeah, like I said, very fruity, very light, very floral, a little bit sweet, but I couldn't tell you the specifics of it. You get a little bit more definition on the palate. I jumped into the sipping already. I mean, again, it's pleasant enough on the mouth. Apparently I have to say pleasant as a descriptor at least once in every review, so there it is. The fruit is still there. Kind of like melon. I mean, whatever kind of light spring, early summer, refreshing fruit you might associate with that time of year. Something you might have in a light lunch fruit salad, that kind of thing. That's probably the fruit sensation I would attribute to this, both on the nose and when you're drinking it. And that's what makes it so easily approachable. It's a little bit sweet, malty, certainly malty. There's not a lot of spice there. I know this is aged in largely in bourbon oak. I mean, a slight spiciness, I suppose, to the finish, but the finish is very short. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about the 12 because that wasn't really the focus of it. What's important to take away from the 12-year-old is that light character of it in every respect. Super light, super fruity, some floral qualities to it, not a lot of spice. I mean, it's nice enough on the mouth. The finish is short. It's still sweet. You get that vanilla and barley finish along with maybe just a touch of like oak spice, right? Like light cinnamon oakiness. But there's not a ton of complexity to it. I wouldn't expect there to be. It's not what this whiskey is made to be. If I had to grade the Glenfiddich 12 for what I'm looking for in a whiskey right now, and of course, anytime I give a grade, as somebody who's just a guy tasting whiskey and talking about it and totally inexpert at all of it. I mean, it's always going to be based on what my expectations are of a whiskey. It's going to be based on what I'm looking for, what I'm enjoying right now. And you know what? I actually, just sipping it right now, I kind of enjoyed that a little bit more than I expected to. But it's not, it's also not really the type of whiskey I'm looking for at this stage. But that's not to say that 99% of other consumers aren't looking for it. And that's the market that Glenfiddich is making this for. They're making it for the introductory market into single malt whiskeys. They're making it for the affordable market, for the people who are casual, and I mean very casual drinkers, right? For the everyday consumer. And they've done an excellent job of it. It's super approachable, super easy drinking. The finish, as I said, is short, but that short finish is what makes it so easy drinking. Because the taste doesn't linger, you want to go back for more, and there's none of the alcoholic burn that you'll get with a more aggressive whiskey, with a higher alcohol by volume whiskey. And you could just drink it all night long and not even realize that you're drinking an 80 proof beverage, because it probably comes off more like something closer to a fortified wine when you're drinking it, right? So something closer to 18 to 20% alcohol by volume. So all that being said, if I gave it a grade, like, I don't know, maybe something like an 80 out of 100. And I give it that because, as I said, for what it is, it's constructed very well. Not my personal taste. I could see some people grading it higher. I could also see some people grading it lower, certainly. It's all kind of arbitrary. And I'm giving them some credit because I think it's a well done beverage for what its intention is. All that being said, the one I really wanted to focus on is the Glenfiddich 15-year-old distillery edition, this little guy here. As I said off the top, this one is 51% alcohol by volume. It's the highest ABV, closest thing to cask strength that I've seen out of Glenfiddich, at least here in Ontario. It's non-chill filtered, which is cool. I know I've said a couple of times already that I'm kind of backing away from caring that much about chill filtration or caramel coloring and all of that. And that's true, but I still think that the less you can alter the natural state of whiskey, the better. If you don't need to do it, why would you? So there's that. But this is an entirely different beast than the 12-year-old. So different. As I said, I bought it on kind of a whim, and I am super glad that I did. So this has been in the glass now 10 minutes before I started recording, and I've been jabbering on for what, 10, 12 minutes, so say 20 minutes in the glass. Totally neat. And unlike the Solera edition of the 15-year-old, this doesn't go into that marrying vat that the Solera goes into to mix at the end of its life, and you know, the living vat that they have for that release. This is a more standard 15-year-old in terms of how they produce it relative to other distilleries. But the nose is lovely. It's you know what, for lack of a better word, it's lively. Those are the kinds of things I feel silly saying sometimes, but it is. It gets you way more. Like the 12-year-old is very subdued, very subtle. I mean, it was hard for me to pick out anything in particular. But this one gets right after it. I mean, big notes of barley and cereal and vanilla and darker fruits, not the light, I don't know, like I said, the fruit salad type things. Like the 12-year-old, you might talk about apple or pear, or I said melon. I mean, you could talk about maybe some green grapes and things like that that go into the 12-year-old. Not at all with this one. This is much darker fruits, right? Maybe like blackberry type fruits. And cinnamon, a little bit of cinnamon there too. As I said, this is neat right now. And I would not drink this neat, but I want to start out with it. And yeah, big arrival on the palate. Those dark fruit notes just so big. Definitely blackberry, a little bit of like dried cherry, dark chocolate as well. Big big barley cereal notes, maltiness to it. Uh, just great. This does need a little bit of water, so let me get that. Yep. Ah, yeah, scintillating, scintillating. All right, there we go. Let's try that out. I'm not going to talk about the finish of it yet, solely for the reason that it's something I want to focus on a little bit at the end. So add a little bit of water, see what that does to it. Definitely knocks down the nose, it makes it much less intense. That may well come back with time once the water's settled in a little bit. But I don't want to have you guys sitting there staring at me waiting for my whiskey to bounce back. So, I mean, the same notes are still there, a little more subdued, a little more vanilla note, a little more toffee. Those big sort of fruit, punch you in the nose kind of notes have been knocked down, at least for now. Yeah, it's much more approachable with water, far less aggressive on the approach. Brings out a little bit of spiciness that was subdued under the big fruit notes when I tried it neat. A little more peppery, a little more cinnamon immediately. A little sweeter, but still so fruity in that dark fruit realm. In the last, I guess by the time this comes out, it'll be 2 videos ago when I talked about Ben Romick and being a warming, comforting kind of beverage. I don't know if you guys can hear the rattling of my ancient windows. It's very windy outside. I mean, this is an early April day, but it feels more like a little bit of a wet fall weather today. I guess maybe that's why I kind of felt like having a whiskey and talking about it. But that's this is the kind of beverage that is in that same vein. It's super comforting, super warming. At 51%, I think I talked about the quality of spirit that I think goes into the 12-year-old. That definitely holds true for this, because at 51%, it doesn't really feel like that. I would always drink this with water, because I do think it's a little bit much at 51%, and I like aggressive whiskey. I like a little bit of alcoholic burn to it, but I would definitely add a bit of water. But like I said, it is drinkable neat at 51%, and it's still enjoyable. There's no question about it, and that speaks to the quality of it. I mean, I was very, very impressed when I tried this for a Glenfiddich product, and I don't know if this is it won't come through on this camera. Definite Scotch mist in there now, which is also kind of cool. Anyway, back to the tasting. Yeah, it's all there. Toffee and vanilla off the hop. Those dark fruits follow up on the development. Still big, and bigger with a little bit of time to settle with the water again. And then dark chocolate and a little bit of spicy finish. And that's what I think, as much as I've talked about how much I enjoy this so far, what put this over the top to me, and more and more and more as I drank through this portion of the bottle anyway, as I tried it a few times, the finish of this particular release is awesome. It's phenomenal. It might be the best, or at least my favorite finish of any single malt whiskey I've yet tried. And I say that, though, not being a big peat head, as much as I enjoy peat, and I like a little bit of lingering smoke and those Ben Romicks and those long row products. I'm not a big peat monster fan. I don't love that smokiness that sticks with you forever. This lingers for a very long time. It comes back in waves, and it comes back in waves with a light, like caramel, toffee, malty, but spicy note. Not smoky, but like peppery, cinnamony spice. And the second you think you're done with it, it comes back again and again and again, and with a little bit of a different twist every time, which makes it a wonderful sipping scotch, because you can have a sip, savor it for a moment, and then you don't need another sip for a while, because you can really just experience the finish for a very long time. And I don't think I've come across that in a whiskey yet. I mean, like I said, I'm far from an expert. I'm just feeling my way through the wide world of Scotch. But this one is really cool. It's awesome stuff. yeah, I really, really enjoy that. So where are we at? This guy's light. It's approachable. It's a great way to start as a novice to whiskey, or somebody that may find Scotch a little bit harsh or intimidating or complicated or difficult to enjoy. This is something that would be fantastic for them. You can also see it being very nice as a light sipper on a summer day. This is like the grown-up big brother. And it's also why I said off the top that I don't know if the 15-year-old is any more of an accurate comparison, or I should say the Solera Vat 15-year-old is any more of an accurate comparison to the Distiller Edition 15-year-old than the 12-year-old is. I think the 12-year-old is better known in general, and this Distillery Edition is so different than any other Glenfiddich release I've had a chance to try that I didn't see any benefit to talking about the Solera, at least not right now. But this is a guy that you could sit on a cool evening and just analyze note after note after note through the finish. I mean, I took the last sip of this a minute and a half, 2 minutes ago, and it's still coming back in waves. It's just, I mean, I can't speak highly enough about that particular aspect of the release. If I had to grade it, I don't have a ton of experience with the 15-year-old yet, so I'm leery about giving it the highest mark I've given a whiskey to date. Probably give it an 89 out of 100. I think I gave the Blair Athol small batch a 90, and I have way more experience with that, and I've enjoyed it for over a longer period of time. I mean, given a little bit more time with this bottle, I may well be inclined to bump it up even above that Blair Athol. It's very, very possible, but like I said, these are all arbitrary grades anyway, at least to a certain degree. The important thing to note is this is an extraordinarily worthwhile purchase. If you've tried Glenfiddich and you haven't enjoyed it in the 12 or the standard 15-year-old bottling, if it's something that's a little bit too light for you and you wanted a little bit something a little punchier with a little bit more complexity, man, give the Distillery Edition a try. I can't recommend it highly enough. I think this in Ontario, the 15-year-old Distillery Edition was $90 odd, $95, give or take a few cents. And that's a perfectly reasonable price here in Ontario for a 15-year-old single malt, especially at 51%. Might seem very high to other people in different parts of the world, but for us, that ain't bad. So, well worth it. Highly recommend. So, I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. I'm going to wrap it up. I don't know which of these two things I'm going to finish first, but while I decide that, sign off. See you on the next video. Cheers.